Welcome to Architecting Security and Governance Across Your AWS Landing Zone. My name is Ryan Jaeger. I'm a solutions architect with AWS supporting public sector customers in Canada, based in Vancouver. Today, I'm going to be joined with James and Michael from Natural Resources Canada. They'll come up on stage and tell you their story. For the agenda today, I'm going to spend the first 20 minutes to talk to you about an enterprise-ready landing zone framework. And how do you think about your AWS environment? How do you manage it as an enterprise, small business, or government agency? What is an AWS account, and what about a multi-account strategy? Then Natural Resources Canada, James and Mitch will come on stage, talk to you about their landing zone journey. Following that, I'll come back on stage and give you an action plan, a checklist, and tell you about a solution that you can use to help you get started. Well, let's begin with a story about Bob. And Bob is an old world IT person, responsible for the servers and the environments in their organization. But we also have developers, and their job is to build applications to support the business. Bob spends a lot of his time working and helping the developers, but ideally, he would rather be focused on the servers and supporting tasks that he is primarily responsible for. So to help with the growing developer demand, we hire more Bobs. But as you can imagine, we also hire more developers. Both are working to help the business. Then along comes the cloud, and things will become easier. So people on Bob's team start learning about the cloud, and so do developers. And people on the development team are also learning about the cloud. But now Bob has to manage the work on both the on-prem world and in the cloud. So he starts off by creating one AWS account, and he puts everything in there. He's managing it for the developers, and the rest of his team are also managing it. And what they start to discover is that they have these gray boundaries. It's not clear on who owns what AWS resource running in that account. It becomes complicated and messy over time. It's easy to lose track of what is happening. It's difficult to track the resources. Whose server is running this 8x large instance that's been running for the last few months? What is it running? What happens if we take it down? Will it impact a production application? And then people stepping on each other, as you can imagine. Who accidentally took down a production site because they ran a development script thinking it would only affect development? So Bob says, that's it, and decides to separate developers and production into their own AWS account. And over time, the same thing begins to happen again. You still can't track the resources or the spend. You still have isolation and blast radius concerns. Developers are still stepping on each other. But now Bob also has to manage identity access management and virtual private clouds here as well. So what's the problem? It's the thinking of the on-premise posture for the cloud, inheriting the ideas from the data center days in terms of scalability. Management and operations don't trust devs if you're to give them full access. But the reality is developers just want to work. And DevOps, of course, is a great idea, but both teams, development and operations, must work together. So we need a solution. We need access to AWS services without barriers. Ability to fail fast without collateral damage. Think about that script scenario I just told you about. Reduce that blast radius so if something does go wrong, it's contained within. Have developers isolated. The operations team become cloud architects, understanding and learning about governance in the cloud. And then together, all the teams are able to influence the digital transformation for the business. The costs and resources that exist and are being used by the different teams can be better tracked and resourced against those individual teams. And we want to optimize code for AWS. So where does Bob start? Well, let's say we start with developer accounts. Whether it's 1 account, 5 accounts, or 100 accounts, developers each get their own AWS account, perhaps full access, and they can do anything they want. But for this part of the story, it's isolated. But we can treat it as a company resource with IT policy per se, and we can use budgets and budget alarms. Maybe you want to give them $50 a month, be alerted when they exceed that. But allow them a place to learn and work. Then we start with team accounts, an area where teams can build a new initiative, or POC. And then we introduce lifecycle management. Production, staging, dev UAT. And with this purple line drawn, it's the partitioning of ownership, where everything above the line is owned by the operations team, and let's say everything below is owned by the development. So what about shared services, things that are shared across all the different teams? Where do we start? Well, we call this a core shared account. We have something that we can create an AWS account dedicated for shared services, such as Active Directory or LDAP. How about a logging account where copies of all the logs get sent into one central location? Have you heard of Direct Connect? We can have a networking account dedicated to the establishment of that connection. And a security account where you can establish cross-account read-write roles that will have access to other AWS accounts that you create. And we'll talk a little bit more of this later. We can share it by tier. So right now you can see the screen here. We have on the left-hand side, we'll add a team shared and a dev shared. So we're isolating and changing the isolation levels for each one. Drawing the line, Bob now realizes that things that he's most interested in are those core shared dev services, and the line of responsibility shifts. We take a different approach to the lifecycle management as well than we previously have. Let's remove that tier that you just saw, and let's add dev UAT as a horizontal line for all the development teams. And we'll go up the stack as well. So then each team now has a staging AWS account where they can put their solutions and applications that they're developing. Production is next. And then we draw lines of governance and security and apply them based on that organization and that team's policies. We're adding governance and boundaries. And those core services that you see on the left become production core, staging core, and dev core. You can see how we are changing how we are choosing to create these accounts to align with the software development lifecycle. But you can be creative. You can even make your own additions to the multi-account strategy. Let's say, as an example, you can have personal accounts created that you decide to give to all your team members that are technical so that they can have the freedom to learn. You could do this up to a budget amount. It can become a benefit. So let's take a minute to talk a little bit more about an AWS account. Anyone can open an AWS account. It's the same steps. But what you may not realize is that you don't just have to have one. And we're going to talk about why you would want more than one to build on the same idea of isolation. One of the main reasons, of course, is the AWS account is the highest level of security and resource boundary. Each AWS account starts off with a set of API limits and throttling. For example, you can launch 20 EC2 or virtual machines before having to request an increase in that amount. And you have the highest level of billing separation with an AWS account. You get the greatest visibility. Think about that initial problem I talked about earlier. How do you tell if different teams are all working in one? How do you do the cost backs? We have tagging, of course, but to get the highest level of isolation, you would need a separate account. So why one account isn't enough? Well, we have many teams, and we talked about it earlier, that we don't want teams stepping on each other. We want isolation, so that if something does go wrong in that example of the developer experimenting with a script, things can be contained and logically isolated. Security compliance controls. Different accounts or different businesses may have different rules or compliance standards that you want to apply. And the business process, likewise, may be different for different teams. And of course, billing separation. We want to be able to isolate and know what that developer is using or that production environment is costing. So we want some goals. How can we improve, and what do we want in a multi-account strategy? Well, we want automation. We want to be able to create AWS accounts in an automated way. And we want it to be scalable, whether it's 5 accounts, 10 accounts, or 100 accounts. We want to have the scalability and automation to support that. Is it possible to have a self-service approach to offload the pressure from Bob? We want guardrails and not blockers. So when we have our security governance, we don't want to just necessarily stop developers from working. We want to enable the guardrails so they're able to work within the rules that we define. And with that, we want to see everything that's going on. Can we track and audit what the different people are doing in these different accounts? And of course, we want to be flexible. Can we extend our solution with different type of accounts and strategies? So these are the goals that we want to have. And as I talked about multiple different accounts that get created, you're probably thinking we need to have security and governance, and you're right. How do we ensure that these accounts that get created have a set of baseline requirements that we define? And with that, let's define a few here, some common ones that you'd want to have. When you open up an account, the credentials you provide become the root account. They have the most access and permissions. So as all these other subsequent accounts get created, you want to lock it down. You want to enable AWS CloudTrail, our auditing service, and Amazon GuardDuty, our intelligent threat detection and continuous monitoring service. You want to federate your identity solution so user accounts are managed centrally. You can't imagine Bob going into every single one of the accounts and manually configuring user accounts. You need an identity solution. You want to define and map enterprise roles, so administrators, developers, security teams, have those as roles and map them properly. Info security, cross-account access roles. How can you establish a way for a security team to do some automation or access another account that gets created? And of course, identity actions and conditions to enforce the governance. So this is beginning the story on the rules and governance rules that you want to apply. For example, you may want to ensure that all your S3 buckets are encrypted. So what accounts should I create? Well, we start off with a top-level AWS organizations account. And if you're in the last session, we briefly talked about what that is, and we'll learn a little bit more here. It's a top-level account that we'll define, and there'll be some hierarchy structure to it, which you'll see coming up. Then we want to create a log archive account. And this could centrally hold our audit trail or cloud trail logs. We want a security account where we can define a central spot for notifications and cross-account access roles. That shared services role where maybe we want to have an Active Directory service that other accounts can share. A networking account, maybe we want to establish a direct connect and have the team work within there. A billing account, if you wanted to copy through automation your usage logs into a separate dedicated account where teams can use different type of tools to analyze that data, you may want to separate that out. And then we have multiple accounts. The sandbox accounts you have where teams can proof of concept projects. Then we have development accounts, many development accounts, pre-production accounts, and production accounts. And those other ones that you may want to define. So let's go a little bit deeper in this diagram where we define the cloud boundary by that outer line. We have an on-prem data center, and we start off with that initial top-level AWS organizations master account. It has no connection to the data center. We have something called service control policies that are applied, and I'll show you an example of what that is in a few slides coming up. You want to have consolidated building, which means as the other accounts that we add, it all will get surfaced up to this one top-level organization where we have the global view on the billing. We want to take advantage of volume discounts. So as other services consume and use storage, we can take advantage of these discounts. And we want minimal resources. We don't want to deploy things in here that we don't want to. We're not launching a website into this account. It has a specific purpose, and we're limiting what can be done. Limited access. And you're going to see me using the words limited access over and over again in the next few slides. There's going to be some repetition here. So let's define a service control policy. A service control policy offers central control over the maximum available permissions for all AWS accounts in your organizations. So this document that you're seeing here is an example of we are denying the ability for CloudTrail, our audit trail of API activity, to be disabled. Even if you were an administrator in that developer account that we talked about, if you try to turn off logging, you would not be able to. Let's look at another example. In this example, we want to ensure that no internet gateway can be created or attached in this account. And this would stop a developer, as an example, if you wanted to do it there, the ability to go out to the internet. And you can define these however you'd like, and then apply them to your AWS organization that will affect all those other accounts that you could create. So let's talk a little about the core accounts and what those are. We'll have foundational blocks, we have building blocks. There would be only one per organization, and they could each have their own development lifecycle. So you could have a development version, a QA, and production, much like we saw earlier in the story of Bob. If we talk about the log archive account, we'll add that to the picture. So what are some of the characteristics that we may want to have in there? We want a version Amazon S3 bucket to contain the log files that get sent there. It's restricted, it requires multi-factor authentication delete if someone were to try and delete it in some way. CloudTrail logs will get sent to this account. So for example, who launched this instance 3 months ago? The CloudTrail logs will be able to tell you, and you wouldn't have to go to all the right accounts to figure out which that is. You can centrally query on the log files that get sent to the log archive files. Security logs, for example, visibility into user activity, API activity. We have AWS config logs that can get sent there, so you can understand configuration changes. A single source of the truth. If you want to perhaps alarm, if anyone attempts to log into this account, we can set alarms and alerts that someone's trying to do that. And again, our limited access. We talk about the next security account. Let's add that to the set of core accounts. And it will have a log file sent. We saw the blue line kind of render. That means that security logs are getting sent to the log archive account. Perhaps we want an optional data center connectivity link. We can put our security tools and audit tools in this AWS account. Guard Duty Master, the intelligent threat detection tool, can get set up here as the master location where all other accounts will send their findings. We want to establish cross-account read-write rules that you can use for automated tooling, such that in an event, security can write tools that can go access other accounts. Again, extremely limited access. We're going to be saying this over and over. So in the shared services account, we're also going to add the log files that get sent to the log archive account. We're going to want connectivity to the data center. Maybe a connection to the security account, connected to the data center. Maybe in the shared service, we have a DNS service. We'll provide Active Directory service to other accounts and establish connectivity, or LDAP. It's a shared services VPC where if we launch other virtual machines in there, other services can take advantage of it. Perhaps deployment tools, your golden Amazon machine images, any scanning infrastructure tools that you want to launch there that other accounts can take advantage of. Monitoring, and again, limited access. For the networking account that we may want to add, it gets added to the core set of core services, and the line gets drawn to represent all its log files get sent to the log archive account. So it's managed by the networking team only. Any networking services they want to install may get put in here. AWS Direct Connect, this would be a good spot where it gets provisioned, and then the accounts can then share that out as needed. And once again, it's extremely limited. Developer Sandbox, next. We have a set of multiple accounts. All their log files get sent to the log archive account. No connections are necessary to the data center. It's an innovation space for developers to work and play. You can set those budgeting alerts so that if they exceed an amount that you define, you'll get alerted. But we want to really have autonomous, have the developers be able to freely experiment. And then we have team group accounts. It's based on a level of needed isolation, whether it's maybe it's one application or a mobile application that you want to have an account for, or a collection. At the isolation level is up to you. But we want to match your development life cycle. So development life cycle is development, staging, test, production. You can think small based on how you want to define these accounts. So let's say we start with development. Its log files get sent to the log archive. Maybe we want an optional connection to the data center. We want Active Directory so we can hook it up to the shared services account. It allows you to develop and iterate quickly. It's a collaboration space for the developers, and we want to have the stages of lifecycle development. Next would be the pre-production account. Its log files are sent to the log archive account. Connectivity established. Again, we will need that Active Directory services, and in this case, we want to connect to the on-prem data center. Connect to the on-prem data center, production-like, staging environment, testing users, maybe they're on-premise, they need access, hence the connection. And we want to use automated deployments, so that's kind of the story building on DevOps. And then development. When you have your production account, then of course all log files again get sent. Sounds like I'm repeating myself, but there's a pattern here that we'll build on later. Connected to the shared services, connected to the data center. Production applications may live in here. Gets promoted from pre-production, hopefully using automation. And again, extremely locked down who can actually access this account in automated deployments. And something like team services that we can add next to the picture wouldn't be something that you would start off with, but could be created over time as common tools or services are shared. Once again, its log files get sent to the log archive account. Access to shared services, sure. Connection to the data center, you can have that. Connection to pre-prod and production are possible. It grows organically over time. It's shared to the team. Production-specific common services that both would be shared. Perhaps a data lake and any common tooling that all are shared. So in this multi-account approach, this is the overall picture of what we just talked about and drew out, where we have your ARGs, your log archive account for your security, shared services like your Active Directory, networking for your Direct Connect, and then you have your multiple accounts for developers, development, pre-production, production. So this is the beginning of your multi-account approach. I'd like to invite Natural Resource Canada on stage to carry on with the talk. Here's Mitch. Mitch. There you go. Which button? This is forward. That's back.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. My name's Mitch Crichton. I'm with the CIO and Security Branch at NR Canada, and I've been asked to come and talk with everybody about our journey with the landing zone. We've implemented it over the last couple of months, and it is a journey as it is evolving. NRCan is a bit of a special place in that it's a scientific department, and it's quite decentralized IT, so we have various sectors within the department. Each of those sectors have their own IT shops. There are scientists there trying to push the boundaries of innovation, doing AI, machine learning, high-performance computing type of needs. So there's infrastructure and cloud needs across the organization. NRCan itself was an early adopter of unclassified cloud, the GOC cloud, through SSC, and we've been actively using AWS for a while. CIOSB, the branch I'm with, we're responsible for facilitation and oversight of cloud usage at NRCan. And in such a decentralized world that NRCan lives in, we needed a solution basically to be able to provide that cloud facilitation and enable our scientists and sectors to do their work while still maintaining some oversight. So when we first heard about Landing Zone, it seemed to fit the bill for exactly what we needed. Thought I had that. Oh, there we go. So that gives a bit of background on NRCan. A landing zone, oh, sorry, that was the slide, didn't know I wasn't on it. Right, so then the benefits that we've seen specifically within the landing zone at NRCan, as Ryan sort of touched on in there, is the idea of this multi-account architecture. It's allowed us to centrally manage all kinds of stuff, most prominently billing, with all the sectors making use of AWS and getting all kinds of accounts that we're provisioning for them. We have sort of this one-stop shop where we can see across the board people's usage, the billing, and a breakdown by each sector so that we can recover costs from them. So one centralized place for sort of that. As far as provisioning accounts and providing those to the sectors out there, we have that one-stop shop again in order to do identity and access management and template the setup of accounts as people make requests for us to get just more and more space, more and more accounts to do their great work and to innovate and all of that. The other thing that we've leveraged that Ryan sort of went over in there is those baseline security controls that are built on AWS best practices in there. And they're helping us meet the Government of Canada security controls and requirements for unclassified low at this point out there. Multi-factor authentication right out of the box can start to be used and applied to each account and tailored to our needs in there, just as one of the many examples. Again, CIOSB being that sort of monitoring and compliance and enabling type of role within the organization, the idea of that centralized logging account where all logs are piped to, they allow us to have the visibility we require to play that oversight role and that compliance monitoring role in the whole organization. More benefits that we have, again, the automation and templating of various features that allow us to strengthen some of the guardrails that are already in place for the organization. You can imagine in a decentralized IT world, as Ryan sort of said, you want to maybe try and restrict some of the accounts, push them down from one place, create policies, push them down to all the sub-accounts from your master account in there. So again, Landing Zone was the perfect sort of solution for us to do that sort of stuff. And finally, a lot of the templates that come with Landing Zone for templating VPC for networking-based components in there that allow us to work towards creating an ITSG 38 compliant network design, so appropriate zoning, using some of these templates out of the box and evolving that. That part of our work is still very much a work in process. We're building towards that, but we're already seeing great benefits there. So our journey with the Landing Zone continues. It's evolving, it's iterative. We work with sectors as we're enabling them. We learn stuff and tweak our Landing Zone, relax some guardrails maybe, strengthen some in other places. But it is a journey. CIOSB specifically, it's serving us very well from that compliance and monitoring role in there. The sectors are more easily enabled out there. And that's really the next part of the talk is, don't just trust me on that part. We have a sector rep here, James Juniper. They're building a fairly large application solution up on the AWS cloud. They've helped us evolve our landing zone as we've learned things as we're trying to enable them while still maintaining some security control and compliance in there. So he's going to come up and talk a little bit about their solution and how the landing zone has benefited them. It's this big button.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Mitch. So as Mitch just mentioned, we're one of the sectors within NRCan that is a beneficiary of the landing zone work that's been done. It's been a team effort, good collaboration with my team. We've got a small group, but highly skilled individuals that are passionate about working towards delivering a Geo-Community Cloud, which I'll talk to you a little bit about over the next few minutes. In terms of the cooperation, I just want to sort of underscore that we've had time over the last month or so to look at how our solution fits within a landing zone concept that Ryan discussed, very informative presentation there. And so as we move forward, we're going to reap the benefits of having done that work together. So a little bit about the Federal Geospatial Platform. So this is an initiative that I spoke here about last year. If anybody attended the summit last year, you may recognize me or recognize the platform. The FGP has been around in operations now for this is I think our third year of operations. Essentially, our claim to fame is that we're the leader in geospatial in the Government of Canada in terms of provisioning AAA data, so AAA data being accurate, accessible, and authoritative. The way that we ensure that is we have developed partnerships with 21 plus federal government departments, and we've put standards and and created things like standard approach to metadata, and so we can actually back up the fact that this data is the AAA quality. And this is important because previously AAA quality data was difficult to find. You had to really go out and look for it. You had to make your own contacts. You had to sort of beat through the bushes and find that stuff, and then things would change, and today we're better off as a result, essentially. In terms of the Geo-Community Cloud, this is a key strategic project that I've been the lead on now for 2 years, and the initiative here is essentially that we want to be in a position to offer cloud-oriented services, technologies, and tools that are well aligned with the geospatial community's needs, and we believe that the cloud is the right place to achieve this goal. So we have deployed the Geo-Community Cloud, first iteration on AWS, and it's been integrated with the landing zone that we've worked with CIOSB to develop. So of course, because this is an enterprise-based solution and it's meant for multiple partners to co-locate in the cloud, we have a requirement for the kind of segregation and account utilization that Ryan referred to before. So of course this provides us with secure and managed multi-account access to our environments. We have multiple environments ranging from dev to prod and some in between, and we have different roles in terms of our team members. We have developers, we have software architects, we have security practitioners, we have people that are skilled in particular areas of the solution, and we want to be able to provide them with the right kind of focused access and contained access to those environments and those components without opening it up widely to the entire solution space. So the Geo-Community Cloud represents the sort of next step, next phase evolution of the FGP. So as I mentioned before, we're focusing on a geo-optimized cloud with infrastructure as a service. And we inherit that responsibility, and it's a co-managed responsibility between us and CIOSB. And then we pass that on as a PaaS offering on behalf of our clients. So the key benefit there in terms of the value proposition for you folks that might be interested in joining us in the Geo-Community Cloud is that we have done the heavy lift to build out the infrastructure components. We are able to scale horizontally and vertically as per your requirements in terms of onboarding of your data and your compute, your storage requirements. We will have done the heavy lift in terms of the security assessment and authorization work. We're well underway in that regard. We've achieved an authority to operate just recently, so we're looking forward to a production deployment within the next 2 weeks. Within the next 2 years or so, we're planning to achieve a fairly lofty goal, but I think it's achievable, and that's a GeoCloud Center of Excellence. So we don't want to be the cloud experts for the Government of Canada. I think there's room for that, of course, as well. I think it's a community of perhaps communities that will achieve that goal. But we are the specialists in the geo realm, and we know that there are some of you out there that are also specialized in this specialty field, and we would like to partner and work with you to achieve some common success. So just a quick review of where we've come in the last few years. So we did proof of concept work in fiscal year 17-18, and that tipped the scales in the AWS direction. We've laid the foundation work on the SSE brokered cloud in terms of the core solution stack. Our core solution stack is based on the Esri enterprise software suite. However, we're not utilizing Esri alone. We have multiple other components, both open source and COTS. One thing I'd like to mention that we have a series of sort of guiding principles. DevOps is one of them. So when things are pushed from pre-production to a production state, that's done as infrastructure as code using CloudFormation scripts. And we're also using Chef and in order for the orchestration component and configuration to happen. So nothing goes to production unless it's scripted. And this has been our advice over the last couple of years, and we're, I would say, an early adopter of the DevOps approach in cloud for the GC. Landing Zone 2.x, we're I think at 2.1 right now, so we've talked about that. That's been a key component over the last couple of months that we've been working very hard. That will allow us, it's essentially a gateway to our production state. So production June, co-location opportunities. We're in discussion with many potential partners and some familiar faces over the last little while. So happy to reach out and engage with you to look at those opportunities. That is our primary focus this year, while we stabilize and ensure the solid operational status of the platform. I think there's also great opportunity here for innovation, and I've talked to many over the last few years about innovation potential and building an innovation hub where people can get together with a suite of tools. The AWS cloud is one such place. At last my count was about approximately 150 services that are available to combine in ways that fit more cloud-oriented architectures that will save you a lot of effort. So utilizing those kinds of services is something that we're constantly we're trying to keep on top of. It's a challenge, but it's one of those fun challenges. One of the things I think we want to definitely tap into, and you hear this constantly these days, applying AI and machine learning to big data. So there is big data in government. NRCan, being one of the lead science departments in the Government of Canada, is one key stakeholder in terms of producing big data. So the Earth observation realm is one such area. I think what we want to be able to do is, instead of just sort of downloading and storing EO data, and then controlling the access to it to enforce acceptable use and licensing considerations, I think we want to extend the benefits and the value of that data to turn it into meaningful information that you can then apply to your horizontal policy initiatives, such as climate change, for example. So again, just to underscore, we have we're driven to partner with you to try to make that kind of thing happen. The concept of linking your cloud environments with ours. If you're in the AWS space, we can look at architecting cloud-to-cloud communications, if that in fact is the best way to go. We're also cognizant that we have a high-performance computing environment in Dorval. We want to look, we're actively exploring what a hybrid type of a geo hub in terms of the cloud concept could look like going forward. So a quick plug, if you saw my talk last year, you'll probably remember this slide. At the time, it was a bit funny. I think I made a promise that I'm not really in a position to make these promises, but on behalf of the CSA, that the launch of RadarSat constellation mission was going to happen. I think it was weeks out at that point. And a year has gone by because we've had delays, unfortunate delays. However, the launch is scheduled for June the 11th, so we're less than 30 days out. I think it's important to note that this is going to be the source of not only great pride and achievement for Canada, but also a source of big data, and we want to be able to look at this and leverage the opportunity of this data. So RCM is going to be covering every spot on the globe every 4 days. It's going to be 1.5 terabytes of downstream data every day. So we ought to be exploring those opportunities to make that data, to turn that into value for our constituents and Canadian citizens and global citizens. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today, and I'm happy later to engage if you wanted to have a conversation on any of this. So I guess I'll hand it back over to Ryan.
You can take that. Thanks, James. So in terms of our summary, let's summarize up what we've learned about today and how you can actually get started. So we finished off with this idea of the multi-account approach. Told you about the organizations, the core accounts, team group accounts. We have our log archive account for security logs, a security account that could hold your AWS config rules, your guard duty, shared services for Active Directory, a networking account to establish your direct connect, development sandboxes, development, pre-prod, prod, and other team services. So that's quite a few accounts. And let's talk about next steps on what we can do to help you implement something like this. So when you think about next steps, you want to define a tagging strategy. How do you automate this? This was one of our goals that we talked about. You'd start off with creating the organization master root account. Then you would create a log archive account, security account, shared service account, and then all these developer accounts as an example. So if we were to draw out this as an action plan, you would have this big list here, and you can be able to get this as part of the downloadable assets after the conference. And here are some of the steps. I'll just highlight a few of them. You'd want to enable CloudTrail, for example. That S3 bucket that we talked about in the log archive account, enabling multi-factor authentication delete, turning on versioning, adding service control policies to prevent the deletion, possibly even backfilling data into these S3 buckets. The security account, you'd have those read-write cross-account access roles, any tooling, the shared services account, you'd have your Active Directory service, and a networking account if you wanted to order your direct connect. Common checklists. We always want to ensure and we lock down those rooted credentials of those AWS accounts. Having complex passwords. Being able to enable CloudTrail in all regions and have that sending to logs in every single account that you create. You want to enable guard duty in all the regions. Set up a security account as the guard duty master and then have all the other accounts send their findings into that one location. Enabling AWS config to be able to track configuration changes. So we have a common checklist here where you may want to go through and do for every single account that you create. And as James talked about, he mentioned this landing zone 2.x. So what is this landing zone 2.x? Well, it's a solution that we provide if you want it, where it's an easy deploy solution that automates the setup of this new multi-account strategy. So now we're talking about that automation and how can you begin to build out these compliance and governance rails in terms of your multi-account strategy. So it's based on the AWS best practices and recommendations that I talked about earlier. You have the initial security and governance controls and that baseline account. Remember we saw that one slide where we talked about locking down the root credentials, turning on CloudTrail, the auditing, enabling guard duty, installing the cross-account access roles. How can you do that every single time in the set of base requirements? It's an automated deployment. So let's look at a picture of what this actually makes up. So you actually get a solution that you deploy into your AWS organization's account, similar to how a quick start works. And it comes with some code, a manifest file that could live in an Amazon S3 bucket, or you can put it into code commit. And this defines the extensibility piece, what you're allowed to customize and what you want in your deployed landing zone. What type of service control policies do you want for a group of development accounts or a group of production accounts? That definition is now defined in this code that you're able to modify. And it pushes out using code pipeline and some other services to all the different accounts that get created. And it starts off with the three, the shared services account. And notice in the top left corner, if you can see it, every account on the screen has that account baseline. So as this account gets created, those baseline requirements automatically get applied. For example, sending logs to the log archive account. The security account has those security cross-account roles. It becomes an Amazon Guard Duty master account. The notifications live here. All of this will get set up during the initial installation and deployment of this solution. So what about that self-service idea? How do I create those multiple development accounts? Or how do I create an account ready to go for production? How do I do that? Well, this solution provides you what we call an account vending machine that leverages AWS Service Catalog, which provides a user interface for you to populate values and make decisions on what you want applied to this account. And when you submit or click the final OK button, it will actually go out and create an AWS account for you, put it inside an organizational unit that defines, maybe it's for developers, production, or core, whatever you define, and then applies all those account baseline requirements that you defined, that networking baseline as well. All the log files in that account get copied into that central location. All of this is done for you automatically. So you get this automation, one of our goals for you. So if we go back to that next step slide, which one of these can we scratch out because of the automation provided by this solution? So you still have to create, for example, your top-level organization's master account. The log archive account, security, and shared service account get created for you during the deployment of this solution. What about the action plan? What gets crossed out? Well, we talked about the log archive account gets created, the S3 bucket to hold all your CloudTrail AWS config logs. Well, that gets created for you. In the security account, the cross-account access roles, so that automation tools can be used to access other accounts, that gets created. That shared service account, it gets automatically created for you with the baseline requirements, as well as a directory service. So you can see several of the items that if you were to go manually in terms of an action plan, get automatically done for you to save you time. On the common checklist side, what are some of the things that automatically happen? Well, linking to the organization master account is done. Turning on CloudTrail. Remember, CloudTrail is our auditing service. It gets enabled automatically in all regions and configured to send those logs into the log archive account. Turning on guard duty in all regions is done for you. The security account is a guard duty master done. Setting up those security cross-account roles are all done for you. So many of these items on this checklist are done for you. So how do I get that AWS Landing Zone? What are my next steps? Well, on our website, you can navigate to the landing zone page, do a search for it, where you can get information. And as James mentioned, we're on version 2.0.1. I don't believe there's a later one that's been deployed yet. And you get the software solution that you can deploy into a new master account and have this up and running for you. So with that, I want to thank you and James and Mitch for coming on stage to talk to you about the AWS Landing Zone. Please complete a session survey and stay tuned for the keynote. Thank you.